Welcome to the 10th episode of Ahargana. I am still in the Western Ghats, except that I crossed over from Karnataka into Kerala, and I am in Banasura Hills in Wayanad. Wayanad is the land of waterfalls, and you can see one right behind me. It's pretty early in the morning, it's just about 7:30 in the morning. Already there is a group of tourists out there who are taking a shower in the waterfalls. I thought I could be alone, but usually waterfalls in India quite busy, quite crowded. But it's still a wonderful place, a gentle breeze blowing, the sun is not yet up, very cool, very pleasant, but not too much chilly like in Devramane in the last episode. Beautiful place to be in. And I hope my microphone picks up the sound of the waterfalls. It will also pick up the sound, the noise which the people are making behind me. But we are not here to talk about nature, at least not nature on this scale. We are here to talk about nature on a much grander scale. In this episode of Ahargana, we will finally start off on Sauramana. Now the Sauramana calendar is anchored upon one calendric element, and that is the varsha. Now that is the time taken by the sun to go around the earth, a complete orbit in a geocentric model, and that is 365 days. Everybody knows that. It's the same in the Christian calendar also. Now all other calendric elements in Sauramana are subdivisions of varsha. For instance, the varsha is divided into two halves, Uttarayana and Dakshinayana. It is also divided into another two halves called Devayana and Pitrayana. This is less well known, but it leads us to the concept of Pitrupaksha. So I will cover these also. Then the varsha is divided into 6 equal parts, and those are the ritus or the seasons. And finally, the varsha is divided into 12 equal parts, which make up the rashis. Now in this episode, I am going to cover a varsha and the 12 rashis that make up the varsha. Now what are the rashis? The rashis are very similar to nakshatra, which I have already covered in the previous episode. So a rashi is 1/12 of the ecliptic. That means you have the ecliptic, you divide it into 12 equal parts. Each part is a rashi, and the 12 equal parts put together is a rashi mandala. So each segment of the ecliptic, one of these 12, every one of these 12 will span 30 degrees, 360 divided by 12. So you can see the similarity to nakshatra. There we divided the ecliptic into 27 equal parts. Here we divided into 12 equal parts. So each rashi segment is significantly longer, almost double that of a nakshatra segment. So this is the astronomical definition of rashi. Now how do these segments get their names? They get their names from an asterism which is located in that segment. Except instead of using the term asterism, I will use the term constellation. Constellation is a more official term. It is recognized by the International Astronomical Union, IAU, of which India is a member. And these constellations have more stars than the previous asterisms we have already seen, and they span pretty much larger segments of the ecliptic, and you can nicely imagine big patterns and figures depicted on them. And finally, there is the calendric definition of a rashi, which is the time taken by the sun, not the moon, because this is Sauramana, the time taken by the sun to traverse one rashi. That time period is also called a rashi. In fact, this time period, the calendric definition, it is also referred to as a Sauramasa. We have already seen Chandramasa much earlier in the serial. Now we are talking about Sauramasa, which is the time taken by the sun to move through one Rashi. So a Rashi in a calendric sense and a Sauramasa are one and the same. Finally, the points where the sun moves from one Rashi to another, that moment in time, when the sun reaches those points, that moment in time is known as a Sankranti or a Sankramana. They both mean the same thing. So we have seen Meshadi, which is the starting point of Mesha Rashi, and that is the beginning of the Rashi Mandala. And when the sun reaches Meshadi, you have Mesha Sankranti. And Mesha Sankranti is Sauramana Yugadi. So starting with Sauramana Yugadi, that is Mesha Sankranti, when the sun reaches the point where Mesha ends and Rishabha begins, that is Rishabha Sankranti. And so on and so on. So there are 12 Sankrantis in a saura varsha, of which 2 are celebrated as major festivals by all Hindus. One is the Sauramana Yugadi, and the second one is Makara Sankranti. Sauramana Yugadi is Mesha Sankranti. So all these points I will illustrate in the stellarium animation, and a little bit, and a few more also I will illustrate. So I'm going to start rolling the animation now. Take a look. Okay, let's get started. This episode is all about Rashis and Sauravarsha. This is the first episode in the Sauramana calendar. Rashis are very similar to nakshatras. They are so similar that this episode will also run in 3 parts, like the previous episode on nakshatras. The first part I will show you the astronomical definition of Rashi. In the second part I will show you the asterisms from which the Rashis derive their names. And instead of saying asterisms, I will call them constellations, and I will explain to you why I do that. And then in the third part, I will show you the calendric definition of Rashis. So let's look at the first part, which is the astronomical definition of a Rashi. A Rashi is one of 12 equal divisions of the ecliptic. That means you take the ecliptic, you divide it into 12 equal parts. Each part is a Rashi. So take a look. So here, as usual, we will start with a point called Meshadi, which is 180 degrees away from Chitra Nakshatra. This is the starting point of the Hindu zodiac. And it is called Meshadi because this is the starting point of the very first Rashi, which is Mesha Rashi. So starting from this 0 point, which I have marked here, you proceed along the ecliptic, you come to this point which is 30 degrees away from Meshadi. This entire segment is Mesha Rashi. So the Nirayana longitude of this segment goes from 0 to 30 degrees. And that is Mesha Rashi. And like I said in nakshatras, here also you imagine this as a slice of a pizza, and this slice is 30 degrees. The next Rashi will start from 30 degrees and it will proceed up to 60 degrees. That is this point, and this is Rishabha Rashi. Proceeding from here, from the 60 degree point, you proceed along the ecliptic and you come to this point, that's the 90 degree point, and this segment is Mithuna Rashi. So this whole angle should be 90 degrees, a right angle. And this continues. So let the animation run on its own. So starting from here, this segment is Karkata Rashi. This is Simha Rashi. And the next one is Kanya Rashi. And Kanya Rashi ends where Chitra Nakshatra is. Then this is Tula Rashi. Then Vrishchika Rashi. Followed by Dhanur Rashi. And then comes Makara Rashi, this one. And then Kumbha Rashi is this segment. And finally, you are back at 360 degrees. This segment is Meena Rashi. So these are the 12 segments of the ecliptic. And these 12 segments are the rashis. And each segment is 30 degrees because you divide 360 into 12 equal parts, then each part has to be 30 degrees. So this is the astronomical definition of Rashi. Now, let me proceed into the next part, the second part. Where do these Rashis get their names from? So like in the case of Nakshatra, in the case of Rashi also, the names are coming from asterisms. Take a look. So that is the first asterism, Mesha Rashi, and clearly it is within this first segment. And hence, this segment gets its name from this asterism. Now, this is a big asterism, unlike in nakshatras where there were barely 1 or 2 or 3 stars, and you could hardly see the lines. Here, it's quite spaced out, which means I mean the Mesha Rashi pretty much covers a large part of the segment. There are lots of stars in it. In fact, one meaning of the word Rashi is a heap. So it's like a heap of stars are there in Mesha Rashi. And in the other Rashis also, as you will see moving forward. And instead of just calling this asterism, I will use a different term, and that is constellation. Now, this constellation is a more official term. Constellations are star patterns which are officially recognized by the International Astronomical Union, IAU, of which India is also a part. In fact, IAU recognizes 13 constellations along the ecliptic, of which only 12 have been known from time immemorial. So we are only going to talk about the 12 which are relevant to the Hindu calendar. So the next one is Vrisha Rashi, and that's also clearly in this segment, and that's why this segment gets its name from this Rashi, Vrisha Rashi, from this constellation. The next one is Mithuna Rashi, and that is also clearly within this segment. And here you can see a pattern very clearly. It's the twins. There are 2 stickman figures here holding hands. Now let me run the animation without any interruption. That is Karkata Rashi. Next one is Simha Rashi, Kanya Rashi, Tula Rashi, Vrishchika Rashi, Dhanur Rashi. This is Makara Rashi, Kumbha Rashi, and finally Meena Rashi. So all of them are stickman figures. Some of them you can start making out. So for example, Simha Rashi. It's beginning to look like a lion here, the stickman figure. Tula, very clearly it is a balance. Vrishchika, little bit looks like the tail, the stinging tail of a scorpion. Also, I would point out here that not all Rashis fit exactly within the segment. Some of them spill over into the next segment. For example, if you take Kanya Rashi, it starts from here, it should end here, but a significant part of the Rashi pattern spills over into the next segment. Tula also spills over into the next segment. Meena clearly spills over into the next segment because this is Meena Rashi. So this wing of the pattern covers Meena Rashi, but this wing is spilling over into the next segment. So these are all approximate in nature. They are not exact, but they are pretty much there in the segment. That's why the segment gets its name from the Rashi, from the constellation. Now I pointed out that these are all stickman figure and there is a line here and there is a balance. Now Stellarium makes this more explicit in this fashion. So it puts some pictures there. So now you can see the lion. And you can see Kanya Rashi is a maiden. And Vrishchika is a scorpion. And since at this level of zoom, it may not be entirely clear, let me zoom in a little bit more. So there you go. That is Mesha, which is a ram. Vrishabha, which is a bull. So these are the horns of the bull. Mithuna is the twins, very nicely represented by Stellarium. Karkata is a crab. So the sticks, the pattern is also approximately there. Sima is also lovely, beautifully represented in this picture. Kanya is nicely represented in the picture, but the actual lines joining the stars, not very intuitive. Tula is beautiful. Vrishchika again, wonderful representation here. Dhanur, strictly speaking, Dhanur is just a bow. But Stellarium is representing that more as a horse, centaur, yeah, horse with a man's head. Makara is a crocodile. The lines and the pattern is not really very intuitive, but the picture is. Kumbha, strictly speaking, means just this picture, this jar. But it is represented more as a man holding a jar. Meena, of course, is fish. And there are two fishes which are drawn here. So these are the pictorial representations which Stellarium throws in, which gives you a meaning of the names of these rashis. So let me go back to where I started from. So this is the second part where the Rashi segments get their names from. Now, let me proceed to the third part, and that is the calendric definition of Rashi. So to get into the calendric definition of Rashi, I need to bring the time element into the animation. So what is the calendric definition of a Rashi? Now it is similar, it's very, very similar to that of Nakshatra, except that nobody says that a Rashi has 12 wives. The privilege of having 12 wives is reserved for moon alone, not for the sun. So a Rashi from a calendric sense is the time taken by the sun to traverse one Rashi segment. So if you look at the animation, the sun is positioned here at Meshadi, and the time taken by the sun to move from Meshadi to this point, which I have marked with the red plus symbol, that would be Mesha Rashi. But in this case, instead of using the term Rashi, I prefer to use the term masa, and that is what I have indicated here, Mesha Masa, because it is a month. It's a calendric thing. It's a month. You can say Mesha Rashi for this also, but I prefer to use the term Mesha Masa because clearly making clear that it is a calendric term. Now, before I actually roll the animation, I have to draw your attention to one more new terminology which I am introducing here called Sankranti. So here is a label which says Mesha Sankranti. What does that mean? Now, the word Sankranti in Sanskrit basically means moving from one place to another. That's all. But in astronomy, this specifically refers to the movement of the sun from one Rashi to another Rashi. Or better still, the entry of the sun into a Rashi. That is referred to, that event is referred to as Sankranti. Now, the entry of sun into a Rashi involves two things. One is, when does the sun enter a Rashi? So, for example, this is Mesha we are talking about. So, the sun enters Mesha on 4:14 at 0 to 13 hours. So, that time when the sun enters a Rashi is known as a Sankramana. But the second thing which is involved here is, where does the sun enter a Rashi? So it enters the Rashi in this case at this point, Meshadi. So this point is also referred to as a Sankranti. Now there is another term Sankramana which is interchangeable with Sankranti. You can use either of these terms. So once again, Sankranti is the event of a sun entering a Rashi. So there are 2 points: when does the sun enter the Rashi and where does it enter a Rashi, and both those terms, the time as well as the point in space, are also referred to as Sankrantis. So since we are talking about Mesha, this is Mesha Sankranti and it is happening at 4:14, that means April 14th at 0 to 13 hours, and it is happening at this point in space. And as I move forward, I will point out to the other Sankrantis. There are obviously 12 such Sankrantis, one at each one of these points marked with red squares. Each one of them is a Sankranti point. So let me move the animation now. So now the sun is moving. This is Mesha Masa. And the sun has reached this point, the next Sankranti point. And then Vrishabha Sankranti has happened on May 14th, 23:10 hours. And Vrishabha Masa starts. So note that also. So a Sankranti is said to be the beginning of the Masa because sun is entering the Rashi. So now that the sun is here, it is entering Vrishabha Rashi, that segment, and hence Vrishabha Masa is starting. So the Sankranti identifies the start of the next Masa. This is different from the convention we used for Tithis and for Nakshatra, where all the times indicated the end of a Tithi, the end of a Nakshatra, whereas here the convention is the Sankranti indicates the start of a Masa, not the end. So now Vrishabha Masa is starting. The sun is at Vrishabha Sankranti point on May 15th, 23:10 hours. Now I will move forward. Now Vrishabha Masa is happening. This is all Vrishabha Masa, and now it's reached the next Sankranti point, and Mithuna Sankranti has happened, and that happened on June 15th, 05:39 hours. And this goes on and on and on. So now Mithuna Masa is in progress. And now Karkata Sankranti has happened on July 16, 16:35 hours. And Karkata Masa is starting. And continuing with the animation, this is Karkata Masa. It is going on and on and on. And now the next Sankranti has happened, that is Simha Sankranti. Now this is Simha Masa until the next Sankranti, and there it is, Kanya Sankranti. And then we proceed forward to the next Sankranti, that is Tula Sankranti. Now Tula Masa is starting now, and this pattern keeps repeating, one Sankranti after another. So every one of these red plus marks is the Sankranti point, and the time indicates the time when the sun actually enters that Rashi segment. Dhanu Sankranti is done. That is Makara Sankranti. Now we are approaching the next one, Kumbha Sankranti. Kumbha Masa is in progress. And that is Meena Sankranti, and Meena Masa is in progress. And we are back to the starting point. the next Mesha Sankranti has happened, 2022, April 14th. Now, I would like you to observe the dates on these. Now, you can see that it's exactly April 14th. You have come from 1 April 14th, 2021 to the next April 14th, 2022. 365 days, same as in the Christian calendar. But look at the times. The previous Sankranti was at 02:13 hours, but this Sankranti is at 08:22 hours. So it's taken 6 hours 9 minutes longer than 365 days. And if you recollect your high school astronomy, you know that even in the Christian calendar, 365.25 is the exact value. And because the Christian calendar does not take care of that, every 4 years they introduce one extra day called a leap day in February, the 29th day. But our calendar is taking care of that. So this is 365 days plus 6 hours 9 minutes, and that is the sidereal orbital period of the Sun around the Earth in a geocentric model. And that's why in our Sauramana there is no concept of leap year. We do have the concept of intercalation, which is Adhika Masa, but I will come to that later. That happens on the Sauramana calendar. So we have moved from 1 year all the way through the ecliptic. Sun has come back to the starting point. So clearly Mesha Sankranti is Sauramana Yugadi. That is when the year starts, the saura varsha starts, and this entire period is the saura varsha. And Sauramana Yugadi will always come on April 14th, except on leap years. Because on leap years, in the Christian calendar, they add an extra day in February. And hence, Sauramana Yugadi will get pushed off to April 15th on leap years. It's nothing happening in our calendar. It's everything on the Christian calendar. Yeah, because of the leap day concept they have in February. Unlike in the Christian calendar, where you have 30 days, 31 days alternating, except in February when it is 28 days, and in leap years it's 29 days, we have no such thing in the Sauramana calendar. So we moved from Mesha Sankranti on April 14th, and Vrishabha Sankranti was on May 14th. Mithuna Sankranti was on June 15th. Karka Sankranti was on July 16th, etc., etc. It's not about 30 days, 31 days, 30 days, 31 days. It is whenever the Sun reaches a Sankranti point, a new masa begins. That's all. So no artificial fitment of days into a month and counting the days. Depends on the movement of the Sun. When the Sun reaches that point in space, we start a new masa. It's as simple as that in our Hindu calendar. So with that, the animations pretty much come to a halt, but I still have to make a series of observations and draw your attention to various points about the Sauramana calendar. The first one I would like to talk about is the rashis serve as a coordinate system, just as the nakshatras do. What does that mean? That means that if you look at, for example, the moon, we can say that the moon is in Simha Rashi because it is in this segment. We don't have to say the moon is so many degrees from Meshadi, etc., etc. We just say moon is in Simha Rashi, then immediately people know it's somewhere here. But then Simha Rashi is 30 degrees. Yeah. So to get more precise, we will say the moon is in Simha Rashi 25 degrees. And that brings you here. Note that there is no concept of pada in the rashis. For some reason that is used only in the case of nakshatras. So this is the way it is done with rashis as a coordinate system. The moon is in Simha Rashi 25 degrees. Or Shukra, Venus, is in Kumbha Rashi, 15 degrees. So this way you can specify the position of every one of the planets. And in fact, this is what the Janma Kundali or the Jataka actually does. Every Janma Kundali actually maps the position of various planets at the time of a baby's birth in terms of the Rashi coordinate system. And also, since we are talking about the moon, so if a baby is born at this moment in time, then the baby's Janma Rashi would be Simha, because that's where the moon is. Just as in the case of Janma Nakshatra, there we were using the nakshatra as the coordinate system and finding out which nakshatra the moon was in. Here we use the Rashi as the coordinate system and say Janma Rashi is Simha Rashi. So this is how the Rashis are used as a coordinate system. The next point I would like to talk about is why 12 Rashis? Why not 10? Why not 15? Why the specific number 12? You are familiar with this question. A similar question was asked in Sauramana also. And the answer here is a flip side of the same coin. This has to do with the fundamental relationship between the orbital periods of the Sun and the Moon. The Moon's orbital period is 12 times faster than that of the Sun. I'm specifically talking about the synodic orbital period of the Moon, which is Amavasya to Amavasya or Purnima to Purnima. That is 12 times faster than that of the Sun. And by dividing this ecliptic into 12 Rashis, what has been achieved is that when the Sun moves from this point to this point through one Rashi, in this case, for example, Mesha Rashi, the Moon would have completed one synodic orbit and a little bit more. Then the Sun moves from here to here, Moon would have completed a second orbit. When the Sun moves from here to here, Moon would have completed a third orbit, and so on and so on and so on. So by the time the Sun moves through 12 Rashis, the Moon would have completed 12 orbits and a little bit more, because it's slightly more faster than 12 times. So what this effectively means is we are ensuring that both in Chandramana and Sauramana, a varsha is made up of 12 masas. And that is the fundamental idea of splitting the Rashis into 12 to kind of keep it in sync with Chandramana. So one Sauramasa is roughly synchronized with one Chandramasa, roughly, not exactly. I will talk a little bit more about it in a few moments from now. The next point I want to talk about is a very interesting point and a somewhat counterintuitive one. Now, recollect from Chandramana that a day is uniquely identified by a Chandra masa, a Paksha and a Tithi. Now, in a Sauramana, how is a day uniquely identified? So, we have seen just now that there is something called Sauramasa, wonderful, but is there equivalence of Paksha and Tithi here? Now, the answer is no. Now, obviously, there cannot be an equivalent of Paksha because the Sun does not wax and wane like the Moon does. So there cannot be Shukla Paksha and Krishna Paksha for the Sun. But what about a Tithi? Is there an equivalent of a Tithi? Now potentially yes, there can be, because there is something called an Ahoratra, which is a day and a night combination. Dina and Ratri put together is called Ahoratra. That could be the equivalent of a Tithi. And typically that starts with a sunrise. Sunrise to the next sunrise is an Ahoratra. But first of all, that does not belong in the Sauramana. It belongs in something else called Savanamana. But more importantly, in the Hindu calendar, the Ahoratras are neither named nor numbered, and they are not used to identify a specific day. So then how is a day identified? A day is identified using a Sauramasa and Paksha and Tithi. Yes, you heard it right. It is rather counterintuitive. So we are bringing two elements from Chandramana into Sauramana. And we continue to use Paksha and Tithi along with Sauramasa. So this leads to a peculiar situation. Now in Chandramana it's very straightforward. So a masa starts, a Chandramasa starts, the first Tithi will be Prathama Tithi. That is by definition. The Paksha can be either Shukla Paksha or Krishna Paksha depending on which system you use, Amanta or Purnimanta. But first Tithi will be Prathama. But that is not the case in this system I am explaining to you in Sauramana. So take for example, this is Meshamasa beginning and the sun is here. Now the first Tithi is not Prathama Tithi because look where the moon is. The moon is somewhere here. This looks more like Ekadashi or maybe Dwadashi is probably where it is now because once it comes here it will be Purnima. So it is Krishna Paksha, Dwadashi or Trayodashi, somewhere it is there. But this is the start of Meshamasa. And what is the Tithi? Dwadashi, Krishna Paksha, not Prathama. But this is the system that is being used in the Sauramana calendar. The community I belong to, we use the Sauramana calendar and we continue to use Paksha and Tithi along with Sauramasa to identify days uniquely. That brings me to the end of this episode. And before I conclude, one final remark. So all these timestamps which I have shown here, I have continued to use the NASA JPL ephemeris to arrive at these dates and times. These are slightly different from what drikpanchang.com shows, but the difference this time I found was mostly around 30 minutes difference. Half an hour, 40 minutes, maybe in one case it went up to 1 hour difference. And given the slow movement of the sun, I could have used Drikpanchang values and it would not have made any difference visually on the screen. But for consistency, I continue to use the NASA JPL ephemeris for this episode also. So as always, thank you very much for watching and thank you very much for your patience. I know once again this has been a long episode similar to the Nakshatra one. I am, in my opinion, the future episodes will go back to being less than 30 minutes. But these two episodes, the previous one and this one, there is a significant amount of content which I did not want to break up into multiple episodes. So I kept them all together, though the episode becomes rather long. So thank you very much for your patience and thank you very much for watching. So now you know all about Rashi and saura varsha. So you would think that we can move on to Uttarayana and Dakshinayana in the next episode, yeah? No. So now that you know about saura varsha and Rashi and you have already learnt about Chandra varsha, this is the right point in time to move on to the topic of Adhika masa. Adhika masa is a concept of introducing an extra month in the Chandramana calendars in order to synchronize that with the Sauramana calendar. So in order to explain that, in the next episode, I am going to superimpose Chandramana and Sauramana into one animation, and that leads to some interesting insights. One of the side effects of that is another point which some of you might already know, but I will draw attention to now, that while the rashis are known as Mesha, Rishabha, Mithuna, Simha, Karka, etc., in most communities, in the Tamil community and Bengali community, they are named differently. For example, the Tamils name their rashis as Chitrai Vaigasi. Now, Chitrai Vaigasi is very similar to Chaitra and Vaishaka, but those are masas from the Chandramana calendar, Chandra masas. So, the Tamil community is picking up names from the Chandramana calendar and using it in the Sauramana. So, that creates confusion in some people's minds as to maybe they are using the Chandramana calendar. No, it is still a Sauramana calendar that they are using. Bengalis do the same thing, and when I superimpose the Chandramana and the Sauramana, I can come at some explanation as to why those communities chose to pick names from the Chandramana. And there are also some other informations about the Sauramana calendar that I will get into in the next episode, and that will prepare the ground for us to get into the actual concept of Adhika masa going forward. So, that is for the next episode, and until we get to the next episode, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for staying with me all this while. And we are making progress. We are getting actually into the more complex areas of the Hindu calendar, because when I say that I am going to superimpose Chandramana and Sauramana, you can imagine the complexity. I mean, this is where the complexity comes in. It's not really complex, but it is a little bit confusing because there are so many different things in the picture. So until then, until I get to the next episode, thank you very much for watching. Take care and bye-bye.